Handling legal matters is stressful. So, let the law offices of Frank Bruno Jr. provide you with the insightful counsel you deserve. The law offices of Frank Bruno Jr. has successfully handled thousands of cases for 25 plus years. They focus on elder law and estate planning, but are equipped to navigate you through all stages of family law and divorce to real estate law and probate. The law offices of Frank Bruno. Call 718-418-5000 or visit them at frankbrunolaw.com. That's frankbrunolaw.com. Frank Bruno. He's your numero uno.
This is The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
They're running a strange program, y'all.
Now, here's Frank Morano.
Well, the whole world is still talking about what transpired on Thursday night, which we covered at length on Friday morning, the disastrous debate from President Biden and his inability to even string together coherent sentences. Now, the next day, when it was during the day, he was delivering written remarks off a teleprompter in North Carolina, and he sounded great. And I heard from more than one Democratic friend of mine who said, oh boy, I wish that was the guy that showed up in Georgia last night. But it wasn't. I mean, I'm not going to play you a lot of the clips. I'm going to play one, but I think it's been overdone at this point. Everybody knows what we saw and heard, and it was just horrendous. It was incredibly sad, is the only way that I think you can look at it. I want to say a couple of things briefly, and then we're going to talk about the Mandela Effect with Cynthia Sue Larson, who I'm very much looking forward to. I find the Mandela Effect to be one of the most intriguing things in the universe. I really do. And this is a show where we like to unravel some of the mysteries of the universe. So it's clear. So I'm going to make a couple of statements, and then I have a question that I want to pose to you. One, everybody should want President Biden to drop out of this race. Everybody. Doesn't matter your politics. Doesn't matter your age. This really can't continue. Now, why? Why should everybody want this? Well, if you're a Democrat, I think the answer is obviously the most obvious, because the guy that was up there on Thursday night, I mean, he's not going to beat President Trump. He was already trailing President Trump before this. I don't see him beating President Trump at all. I don't see it happening. Is it possible? Sure, anything can happen between now and November. I have a very difficult time seeing that, because the whole country saw what it saw. 48 million people. Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump. And
it's the last time I'm going to play it, because I feel like a lot of the media is playing this. It's almost, I find it like you're trying to poke fun almost at a man who I think is sick. Now, I that's the other thing. I've been seeing doctors quoted in the press analyzing what his condition is. You have no idea. They have no idea. Neither do I. So I'm not going to speculate. I saw Bill Ackman, the hedge fund guy, who I think was a supporter of President Biden in the past, and he may still be, I don't know, saying that he's heard from a doctor that Biden has Parkinson's with Lewy body dementia. How does he know? Unless you've examined him, you really have no idea. I'll tell you what. Whatever's going on, I don't know whether it's a result of age or an after effect of his aneurysms, or whether it's dementia, or whether it's a combination of all those things. He is not in a strong position mentally. He's just not. I mean, compare that, what we heard on Thursday night, to his 2012 debate against Paul Ryan, a guy that was young and vigorous and intelligent.
Vice President Biden.
Let me translate. Let me have a chance to translate.
I'll come back in a second then, right?
First of all, I was there when Ronald Reagan tax breaks. He gave specifics of what he was going to cut. No, number one, in terms of tax expenditures. Number two, 97% of the small businesses in America make less than $250,000. Let me tell you who some of those other small businesses are. Hedge funds that make $600-800 million a year. That's what they count as small businesses because they're pass through. Let's look at how sincere they are. Governor Romney on 60 Minutes, I guess it was about 10 days ago, was asked, Governor, you pay 14% on $20 million. Someone making $50,000 pays more than that. Do you think that's fair? He said, oh, yes, that's fair. That's fair. And they're going to talk about, you think these guys are going to go out there and cut those loopholes? The biggest loophole they take advantage of is the carried interest loophole.
I won't play the whole thing, but he sounds like a different guy. Sounds like a different person. And he was about 70 years old there. I think he was about 69. He was 69, technically. So it was not as if he was 25 years old in that clip that I just played. He was, almost double the age of Paul Ryan. Maybe not quite double, but he was significantly older than Paul Ryan. So if you're a Democrat, I think it's clear that you want President Biden out of this race. It's clear, right? Because any other Democrat that's been mentioned gives you a chance to win. President Biden, as far as I can tell, has no chance to win. Now, there are others that are more intelligent than I am that disagree with me, and I'm going to let you hear from them in a second. But, I mean, Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer, Pete Buttigieg, Wes Moore, Kamala Harris, who I know everyone loves to bash her, and I wouldn't vote for any of these folks, but these are all folks that are very much with it, and they're on top of things. President Biden is not. And any undecided voter or any swing voter in any swing state, as much as they detest Donald Trump, they are not going to vote for a guy that they think is not all there. And I think that's really the conclusion you have to draw after Thursday night's debate. Okay. So if you're a Democrat, you want him out so that you can win. Now, obviously, if you're a Trump supporter, tactically, you want Biden in, right? Well, first of all, on a human level, you really shouldn't, because nobody should be going through this on a public stage for the whole world to see. And this is not something that's going to get better. Additionally, if President Trump wins, if he gets elected beating this impaired President Biden, there is going to be such an asterisk to his whole presidency. You know how they blamed 2016 on WikiLeaks and James Comey and Russia buying Facebook ads and fake news? You will hear every Democrat say for 4 years, the only reason that he got elected in 2024 was because he was running against someone addled with dementia. It takes away a pretty significant mandate from President Trump, and I can't see that being good for him or his agenda. And I'm sort of in the same boat as an RFK supporter, because, look, the best thing that RFK has going for him, honestly, is that he's not Trump or Biden. These are the two least liked major party nominees in history. They do have their defenders, both of them, but on the whole, that's not me saying that. That's what the statistics show in terms of favorability and unfavorability. So if they put in another Democrat that's a bit more likable, who is not necessarily suffering with some of the same issues that President Biden is, I think that could potentially be bad news for RFK. But speaking just for myself, who is an RFK supporter, if you're an independent, or even if you're a Democrat or a Republican, don't you want the best Republican and best Democrat possible? You don't want your candidate to win because they're the best of the worst. And I don't think anybody could say that President Biden is the best Democrat that's out there right now. I know some Republicans feel that way about Trump as well, but by and large, most of the Republican electorate is very proud to be behind Donald Trump. You see that when you talk to any of them. I don't think you could say the same of Biden. I think the best thing for the country is a real robust debate about the future of the country and by people that are able to make that case. And I don't think Biden is able to make that case. I don't think he's able to make any case. So, it's being reported that there was this big meeting in Camp David over the weekend that President Biden met with his family, and Bill O'Reilly is reporting that he has sources at BillO'Reilly.com that say Biden is definitely out, that he is dropping out of the race, and they're just figuring out how to make this happen and how to handle the logistics of it. So O'Reilly says he's definitely out. The New York Times is reporting just the opposite. They say he's met with family and he's definitely in. And there was no bigger voice in support of him staying in this race than Hunter Biden. Gee, wonder why. So depending on who you believe, Bill O'Reilly of the New York Times, Biden is either definitely running or definitely not running. He absolutely should not run. And maybe President Trump will have a tougher time getting elected if that's the case, but he absolutely should not run. Now, the only person that can make this case, who can do this, is President Biden, because the delegates that are pledged to him are bound to him unless he releases those delegates. So there's no amorphous they that can come out of the shadows somewhere and say, hey, kid, you're out. We're putting in Gretchen Whitmer. So he will have to be the one that makes this decision. Now, if all of the big donors, and I may get into this a little bit more with Li Fang a little later, but if all of his donors, if all the people that he respects, of his advisors, all tell him that there's no way to win, and that your being in this race only serves to guarantee President Trump a win, I think there's a good chance he'll listen. Now, he may not. Power is a very difficult thing to give up. But who knows? So I think he has to drop out. And I think that's potentially bad news for the Trump campaign as well. But he should drop out. And if you're a Biden supporter, and I'm not talking about somebody that voted for Biden just because you hate Trump, but if you're someone that admires Biden, you think he's both a good guy and you admire his record of public service, you have to want him to drop out, because he's such, this is going to be how people remember him now. People are going to be remember him as almost the way they talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg now. They're going to remember him as a guy that didn't know when to get off the stage, a guy that should have passed the torch to a new generation of a Gretchen Whitmer, of the Democrats actually have a pretty deep bench. I know the Republicans don't like to acknowledge that, but it's true. There's a lot of young, attractive, telegenic, well-spoken, intelligent candidates that don't have issues with some of the things that President Biden clearly has issues with now. But the longer he stays in, the more likely he is making it that Trump's going to win. Is that what you want his legacy to be? After 50 years in public service, guaranteeing a Trump win? I've heard from some friends and family who are Biden supporters that, oh, no, we're not voting for a person. We're voting for an administration. We're voting for an administration. I don't think, now there may be a lot of truth to that because clearly after Thursday's debate, somebody has had to be running the country, and it was not the guy that was up there Thursday. So if I understand that, I just don't see the American people viewing it that way. They actually view the person behind the office of the presidency as really meaning something. I don't think you can say to them, well, look, he's not in tip-top shape, but look at the great team that he has behind him. And I just don't think that that's going to fly. But I want to raise something that one of the callers brought up on Friday. Well, actually, before we get there are two people who are very intelligent that totally disagree with me. One you heard from on Friday, and that was Anthony Weiner. He was my guest on Friday. He says there's no way Biden gets out. No way.
Is it impossible that at the convention people decide, nah, I'm going to go someplace else? It's not impossible, but it is virtually impossible. It is very difficult to do. And I don't, there is this fantasy exercise of, well, if it's not Joe Biden, who would it be? Or if it's not Donald Trump, who would it be? I know there's a lot of talk this morning, which in and of itself speaks volumes about the debate, but it's a very difficult thing to do.
So Weiner said it's unlikely. Some other people that I trust in my circle of political brains, they say it's unlikely. But this was one person that was on CNN who was just on our show 2 weeks ago that I was pretty surprised in the manner in which he said this. And that is Professor Alan Lichtman. Alan Lichtman is one of the most intelligent political science professors in the whole world. And he is a brilliant historian, and he's taught at American University in Washington since 1973. He's the one that created the keys to the White House model and correctly predicted every presidential election since 1984. Every single one, including Trump in 2016, including Biden in 2020. And this is what he said on CNN about the efforts to replace Biden.
It's a huge mistake. They're not doctors. They don't know whether Biden is physically capable of carrying out a second term or not. Remember, a lot of folks were saying the same thing about Ronald Reagan, who was, 73, and age was very different then. And they said, he's not capable of carrying out another term. He won 49 states. So this is all foolhardy nonsense.
I think there's some big differences between the way Reagan came across in that 84 debate and even before that, a famous line against Mondale, and what we saw from Biden on Thursday. But again, when Alan Lichtman says something, I do take it pretty seriously. So he says it's foolhardy nonsense. But what caught my attention was a call that we got from Jamie in Westchester, who's a Democratic primary voter, who said the following.
My opinion is that the media had this narrative of, oh, no, this is an emergency. What are we going to do? Locked and loaded before the debate even started, because you'd have to be deaf, dumb, and blind to have not expected exactly what happened.
So a friend of mine who is a brilliant guy, he came up with something that I feel like she was saying the same thing. They said, basically, he said, look, there's never been a June presidential debate in history. There's never been a general election debate before the conventions. And isn't it interesting how immediately after the debate, every single liberal pundit and talking head, Van Jones, Rachel Maddow, everybody, even Joe Scarborough, who I think you'd at least have to consider a left of center talking head at this point. Every single one of them said the same thing, which is he's got to go. So is it a coincidence that for the first time in history, they had this convention, this debate before the nominating convention, and that all of these anchors and pundits reading from the same script, not literally, but figuratively reading from the same script, are all saying the same thing. So basically, my friend's theory was that they knew, whoever they is, but people, power brokers within the Democratic Party and even within the Biden administration knew kind of what Jamie said, exactly what was going to transpire on Thursday night. And they basically were prepared to have the reaction that we've seen from the New York Times editorial page, from the Atlantic, from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and from almost every rank and file Democrat that I know. They knew that this was going to happen and are going to use this as an opportunity to push him off the ticket. So that's my question for you is, do you think, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, do you think that this was some sort of a conspiracy? I hate to use the word, but I don't know what else you'd call it, but a conspiracy to publicly expose Biden at his weakest moment and use this as an opportunity to get him off the ticket. So that is the question. 646-720-0635. 646.
Since before your sun burned hot in space and before your race was born, I have awaited a question.
646-720-0635. The president did have some defenders on some of the Sunday shows. Jim Clyburn, who's also in his 80s, so he, age is not something that that seems to have slowed him down much. He was on CNN. He said the problem was that President Biden was a little too over-prepared.
When you've been running the country, as he has been for 3.5 years, faced with all of the issues that he is faced with, you don't have time to set aside and make up stories about the past or to forget about what's going on around you. You've got to face your job, and he's been doing that. And so for him to go into preparation, and what I've been calling this a classic example of preparation overload, I just think that there should have been much less preparation for this debate and much more activism in his job.
There you go. He said that's the problem. Too much preparation. Jamie Raskin, the congressman from Maryland. Big shout out to all of our listeners on WCBM in Baltimore. He was on MSNBC's Ali Velshi. This is what Jamie Raskin said.
There was a big problem with Joe Biden's debate performance. And there's also just a tremendous reservoir of affection and love for Joe Biden in our party. And so this makes it a difficult situation for everybody. But there are very honest and serious and rigorous conversations taking place at every level of our party because it is a political party and we have differences of point of view. I mean, if you compare that to the non-existent dialogue and conversation that took place in the Republican Party after Donald Trump's criminal conviction on 34 counts, it's remarkable. And so we're having a serious conversation about what to do. One thing I can tell you is that regardless of what President Biden decides, our party is going to be unified, and our party also needs him at the very center of our deliberations and our campaign. And so whether he's the candidate or someone else is the candidate, he is going to be the keynote speaker at our convention. He will be the figure that we rally around to move forward and beat the forces of authoritarianism and reaction in the country.
By the way, I agree with much of what he said there. I do think they need Biden's buy-in 100%. I do think they need him to be the unifying figure and to bless whoever the new nominee is. But what he said there was so interesting. There are these conversations going on right now, and Raskin is describing it as something that's very uncertain right now. I mean, he didn't sound like this is a done deal that Biden is staying in. So the Times says Biden is staying in. Bill O'Reilly saying Biden is definitely out. What do you make of this? 646-720-0635. I think it's clear that he should go. Now, then the question becomes, who do you put on? I think you could put on almost anybody and they would do better than President Biden. Somebody like Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, I have a difficult time seeing how he would lose. I think he wins Pennsylvania. I think he makes, whatever. I don't want to go through the pluses and minuses of each of the candidates, but a lot of people have been talking about Gavin Newsom, and it's clear Gavin Newsom has been positioning himself for the job. So one question that has come up a great deal over the last few days is, how can you have Gavin Newsom on the ticket if Kamala Harris stays on the ticket? Because they're both from California. Well, there are a few options. One, maybe she'll get off the ticket. I don't see her volunteering for that. But maybe if they offer to make her governor of California or put her on the Supreme Court, maybe she'll get off. I don't see that being likely. But Trump has the same problem with Byron Donalds or Ron DeSantis or Marco Rubio. At least two of those names are supposedly in contention for Trump to be his vice presidential running mate. And I've been doing some research and reading some analysis of this question over the last few days. And apparently it all comes down to, by the way, if you're not familiar, the Constitution says you can't have a president and vice president from the same state and then count the electoral votes from that state. Meaning, if you're from Florida, you would not be able to vote for both Trump for president and Rubio for vice president. If you're from California, you're not going to be able to vote for both Newsom for president and Harris for vice president. And obviously, the Republicans are not going to give up the electoral votes of Florida, and the Democrats are not going to give up the electoral votes of California. So what some people are saying is the date of the election in November doesn't matter. The date that matters is the date that the electors meet to vote on their nominee, which would be in December. And so we'll know who won the election, presumably, before December 12th. So if the Democrats have won, then Harris could change her residency to D.C. Rubio, if the Republicans won, Rubio or Donalds could change their residency to somewhere else as well. So that's kind of what people are saying. Or you could vote for someone else for vice president, and depending on the size of the majority, you could do that. But it does definitely create a problem. All right. We're going to talk with Cynthia Sue Larson coming up in just a minute, but I want to take some of your calls first at 646-720-0635. One, do you agree with me that no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, President Biden has to get out of this race? Two, do you think this was something of a setup? That's why the debate took place so early, and that's why everybody reacted exactly the same way. Let me begin with Buchanan in Brooklyn. Buchanan, that's your first name?
No, that's the name that I was born with.
Ah, okay. Well, what's your first name?
My Patrice.
Patrice, yes. Hi, Patrice.
Hi, Frank. I just wanted to mention, and you and I always have the best of conversations. I misspoke one time, but but I thought our President Biden was in extreme pain, Frank. I listened to him because I was in medical school less than 100 years ago. Okay, but seriously, I thought that he was in extreme pain, and I hear that he did have a sore throat. Now, if he was acting somewhat theatrically, I can understand it, and I think a politician is going to understand that. Just to whatever, but I think he was. Didn't you hear that? Did you hear that he had a sore throat?
I heard he had a cold. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. There's not a cold in the world that will make you appear the way that he did on Thursday night. Yeah, that's not a cold. That's something else. I don't know what it is, but it's not. It's more than a cold. 646-720-0635. We're going to talk with Cynthia Sue Larson about the Mandela Effect coming up. But first, let me say hello to Neil. Neil, what do you think about all this?
Frank, I think you're so far off base. Number one, you're acting like a kingmaker, saying who should run, who shouldn't run, he shouldn't run.
Well, no, I mean, if he drops out, then they can have a contested convention, and ultimately all the Democratic delegates that are currently pledged to Biden will make the decision.
Frank, if they want him out, let him bring up the 25th Amendment, but they won't because they're a bunch of cowards. I wouldn't give them a second bite at the apple. They raised millions and millions of dollars on this guy. We all knew he was no good. All you had to do was see his speeches. But up until a few weeks ago, they would talk about how sharp he is, how all the video was phony. They're a bunch of phonies. The Democrats protected this guy. They actually hid the truth about him from the constituents, from the people. And now that they had a bad debate, all of a sudden they want to get rid of him. Let him get the 25th Amendment, Frank. Let him get rid of him the right way.
All right, but the 25th Amendment, if the cabinet were to remove him with that, it still does require, some congressional, action as well. It's not just the cabinet. But so you would say remove him with the 25th Amendment and then have President Harris and then select a new nominee at the convention.
Well, that's the way it goes, Frank. That's the law.
All right. Well, I mean, it's never happened before. We've had presidential candidates drop out before, but
it never happened before. But it's always the first time, isn't it?
Yeah, fair enough, Neil. Thank you. I mean, it does raise the question of if he's not able to be a candidate, how can he run the country? I think really the answer to that is President Biden says, "Look, there's a lot going on in the world right now that requires my attention in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, here at home with inflation. And we've achieved many of the goals that we set out to do 4 years ago. And I don't want the rigors that are necessary to run the kind of campaign that's needed to beat Donald Trump to distract me from all of the focus that needs to be on the job of being the president." So, I mean, that's really the only thing I think he could say as to why he's staying in office but not running for re-election. David in the Bronx, I know you disagree.
Yes, strongly. And let me just say this, Frank. I contacted you after that debate performance, and I told you that I was not happy with it and that I was wavering my support for President Biden. But I'll say this. I think it's clear that this was a one-off. He needs to get out there like he did the next day. He needs to be strong. He can pull himself up. President Biden is the comeback kid. I call him Grandpa Joe. Grandpa Joe, people can beat up on him all they want. They're only going to make him look better by doing it, because ganging up on an elderly man who has done as much for this country as he has, especially in the past 4 years, is going to blow up in these people's faces. Shame on Rachel Maddow and all these other people who get paid by these huge corporations who are trying to destroy this man and get him to withdraw. As the professor
David,
who was on your program said...
David, I don't... Go ahead.
No, because the incumbency is one of the most powerful tools for re-election, and only a fool would give that up in the middle of an election, which is what people like you are expecting the Democrats to do. Now, please say what you were going to say.
No, so David, folks like Thomas Friedman, folks like Nicholas Kristof, they're friends with Biden and friendly with Biden. He's had private briefings with Biden. I don't think Thomas Friedman is taking any joy in the fact that he's calling for Biden to leave the race. I think Friedman really believes that Biden staying in the race makes it more likely that Trump's going to win. I'm just curious as to why you don't feel that same way. You actually think that Biden is a stronger candidate than any of the other people that are talked about?
Let me explain this to you. As I said, and the professor who you gave credit to,
right, Alan Lichtman, yeah.
Being an incumbent is a very powerful tool. It's one of the keys to retaining the White House. The other thing is, you tried to pretend that this election that Trump was way ahead. That's not true.
No, I didn't say he was way ahead. I didn't say he was.
You said that he was way ahead or something similar to that.
No, I said he's leading in a lot of the swing states.
The latest polling, even afterwards, is within the margin of error. So this is still winnable. And the other thing, Frank, is you have to remember this. Donald Trump has his own issues with cognition that the mainstream media hasn't talked about so much. People who listen to Fox News and to your station will never hear about some of the crazy things that Trump says all the time. What about those? I mean, he's made crazy comments in the past couple of days. I mean, there's an issue with both of these men.
But
I know
David,
I said to Curtis a few weeks ago, both of these men are too old. That's a fact. But I want the guy who doesn't say he's going to be a dictator on day one, or a guy who's not coddling up to Vladimir Putin and the guy in China and the guy in North Korea. I want that guy. And if President Biden is, I know he's not listening, but what Democrats need to do is get him out there. The best person to speak for President Biden is President Biden. And if he can't do that, then he does need to step down, right?
I think you're right, David. But and thanks for the call. No one is going to be bringing up Trump's cognitive issues while Biden is in the race, because I mean, just the comparison between the two is so stark. All right, those of you that are holding, I'll get to you a bit later. If you want to jump on board, you can. 646-720-0635. I am very excited to talk with Cynthia Sue Larson about the Mandela Effect. Do you know what the Mandela Effect is? I've talked about it before. And it's, to me, one of the most fascinating things. Why do different things get misremembered en masse by strangers? We'll give you some examples and explore the question with Cynthia Sue Larson straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
44 minutes after the hour. You ever think about the Mandela Effect? If you don't know what that is, let me give you a couple of examples. Do you remember the popular children's book series about bears? Starts with a B. Do you remember that book series, Bill? No, Bill doesn't remember. So most people, me for instance, and I read these books to my son, I could have taken a lie detector test that says that these were the Berenstain bears. I would have been absolutely wrong. It's not the Berenstain bears. It's the Berenstain bears. How do you spell Febreze? A lot of people remember the air freshener brand being spelled F-E-B-R-E-E-Z-E. No, it's F-E-B-R-E-Z-E. How do you spell Looney Tunes? Well, a lot of people remember it vividly as L-O-O-N-E-Y-T-O-O-N-S. No, it's T-U-N-E-S. The list goes on and on. Now, why do we call it the Mandela Effect? Because many people recall Nelson Mandela dying in prison during the 1980s or shortly after he came out of prison, when, of course, he was released from prison in 1990 and he died in 2013. And yet, in all the examples that I just gave, plus Luke, I Am Your Father in Star Wars, the Monopoly Man's monocle, Pikachu's tail, the Fruit of the Loom logo, and 100 other examples, you have en masse strangers, different people, all misremembering the same thing the same way. Now, why? Are we living in a computer simulation? Is this a glitch in the matrix? Is this some mass delusion that we're all suffering from? I've heard a lot of interesting theories, But I have never had the opportunity to talk with Cynthia Sue Larson about this, and she has studied this more closely than most. She's the founder of RealityShifters, the first president of the International Mandela Effect Conference, and a best-selling author whose books include The Mandela Effect and Its Society, Awakening from Me to We. Cynthia, thanks so much for staying up late with us.
Oh, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be with you tonight, Frank.
No, the pleasure is all mine. Cynthia, what's your best guess as to what the Mandela effect is and why it occurs?
Well, to me, it seems obvious that there's definitely a real phenomenon first and foremost, because some people say, even in the definition, they'll say it's collective misremembering. And I would just want to say I do not think that's what it is, although that is what the way people talk about it. To me, this is clearly an indication that nature is basically intrinsically very different than what we have assumed. And so I've got a background in physics. I studied physics at UC Berkeley, so I'm bringing some of the physics in from quantum physics just to clarify that some of the strange phenomenon that we're witnessing matches nicely. It dovetails neatly with physics itself, and therefore you could consider this to be a combination of things. Simulation is one theory that people have as to what's going on. You could also call it a dream. Within quantum physics, there's the idea of quantum phenomena, and then we get into things such as evolution of consciousness, which may seem kind of far out there, but once we start seeing things like UFOs, having near-death experiences, and then witnessing the fact that it seems like reality is changing, when the Berenstain bears that we grew up with are no longer the Berenstain bears, now they're the Berenstain bears, and we know that's wrong. And physical changes are the ones that get me. The heart, I remember it used to be on the left side of the chest. Now, if you put your hand over your heart for the Pledge of Allegiance, that should be in the center of your chest. So those kind of things, to me, it's quite obvious that we're seeing evidence of geographic changes, anatomical changes. Most of them are sort of lighthearted. They don't seem to cause a lot of trouble, but they might be considered upgrades in a sense. I know people get upset with the Bible changes. They'd say that's not an upgrade, but I think it's getting our attention. Like in the subtitle of my book, From Me to We, it seems to me that once we collectively remember things in a very similar fashion, like we're not just remembering random things differently, and it's not a huge disparity in all sorts of different recollections of Berenstain, but we've got a similar shared memory of Berenstain.
Right. No, and Cynthia, we spoke a couple of years ago, and you really gave me so much to think about with some of the examples that you offered, and I'm just so impressed in terms of your research on this. But a lot of folks, after listening to our interview a couple of years ago, and when I've talked to them about this, they attribute the Mandela effect to psychological phenomena like false memories. How do you differentiate between these explanations and the possibility of something like alternate realities?
Right. That's a great question. And it's kind of like falling in love. It's a personal experience. You know when you've had it. People might tell you it doesn't exist because it doesn't happen to them. But the truth is, when it happens to you, and you know for sure, like for one thing that happened to me is I went to turn the timer dial on my drying machine, and it didn't. My motor memory, muscle memory, no longer worked because the dryer dial needed to be turned in a very different manner than it had before. Or if one of these Mandela effects catches a person, and they know for sure that they're not confused about it, this is not something that they would mix up. Whether it's Thanksgiving Thursday, I remember American Thanksgiving was the third Thursday of November. And I've heard from people that say that their birthday was really close to that, and now the American Thanksgiving has never been the third Thursday. So I think the false memory thing can only be taken on individually. There's no way to prove this, although I am starting to see some evidence from physics, quantum physics experiments being conducted in laboratory settings, showing that you can have two observational devices that are trusted, receiving very different results for what's happening at the same place and same time.
Wow. We're talking with Cynthia Sue Larson. If you want to check out her website, it's RealityShifters.com. You can also check out the book, The Mandela Effect and Its Society. Cynthia, I know it's late, but if you wouldn't mind hanging on 1 minute, I'd love for you to stick around as we take a quick pause in the conversation, okay?
Yeah, my pleasure.
We're going to continue with Cynthia Sue Larson, talk about the Mandela Effect straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
I get around, yeah, get around, round, round. I get around, I get around.
My guest is Cynthia Sue Larson. She's the founder of Reality Shifters and the author of the book, The Mandela Effect and Its Society, Awakening from Me to We. Cynthia, can you explain how quantum mechanics or the multiverse theory might provide a framework for understanding the Mandela effect?
Yeah, the multiverse theory, a lot of people have heard of that, and it shows up in movies, popular films, and so forth. And so it's sort of a familiar idea. In the realm of physics, it was first proposed by Hugh Everett III, and he was talking about many worlds interpretation of quantum physics. So what that means is that literally there could be many different versions of you and me and everyone and everything else. So that's pretty much, as weird as that sounds, it's almost an indisputable, agreed upon statement these days with most physicists. Now, that doesn't mean that the multiverse or many worlds interpretation is the one that they would say is absolutely correct. We don't yet have proof that any of the various interpretations are the right one. But it gives us an idea and a sense of what it might feel like, just to be having lots of different, like if you make a choice in your day and you could have turned left at an intersection or you could have turned right, and your whole world your life is different based on that choice. Usually it doesn't matter that much, but a small decision like that can have all sorts of implications. And so that's where this idea comes in. And if it's true, which it seems to be, that we are experiencing these other worlds, then we would expect from time to time to see that the world is slightly different than we remember it.
What do you think of the broader implications of the Mandela effect for our understanding of human consciousness and the nature of reality?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting, because it has huge implications for both the nature of reality and human consciousness. To me, it seems clear that the indication is that we humans are much more than our physical material bodies, because we are capable of having some extraordinary experiences. And, even critics and skeptics would have to agree that we see a lot of things that can't really be explained with straight-out materialism.
Wow. Really interesting. Very quickly, how do you envision the future of our society if the concepts of things like reality shifts and alternate realities become widely accepted?
I see great possibility there, because it looks to me like we would have the toolkit, if you will, to tackle problems that otherwise might seem insoluble or too much, just huge, like they're outside of our range of operability. Because it seems like what's happening is we're noticing, like with some of the physiological changes, that we're getting upgrades to the human anatomy. And I know that may not be what everyone's seeing, but I definitely see that. Just things that seem to explain within the realm of biology itself that any kind of organism is capable of suddenly, instantly changing and evolving to exactly the best possible evolutionary state that they would be able to make.
Well, if people are interested in learning more about this, you should absolutely check out the book, The Mandela Effect and Its Society, Awakening from Me to We. You can also go to RealityShifters.com. Cynthia, thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank.
I find it really fascinating. I could talk with Cynthia for hours. I'm going to absolutely check out this book. And I think the impact on society and culture is interesting. I think the research into this and the future directions it could go is absolutely fascinating. And it is a reminder to keep those 3 important words going. Keep asking questions.